The following content is provided under a Creative Commons license. Your support will help MIT OpenCourseware continue to offer high-quality educational resources for free. To make a donation or view additional materials from hundreds of MIT courses, visit MIT OpenCourseware at ocw.mit.edu.
So this is a really stunning fact. In a sense, we talk about lots of forms of inequality and unfairness in the world, but here's a fact that's really quite striking. So here, the fact that you start from the basic, just the fact. It's the fact that if you look at the ratio of men and women in the population, most countries in the world have many more women than men. This is mostly because women are just better designed, it turns out. When men get to the age of about 60, various things, bad things happen to them. In particular, their arteries seem to harden, and they get, lots of them die from various cardiovascular diseases. So as a result, most countries have many more women than men. I mean, so the ratios are up there. Europe has 1.05. Sub-Saharan Africa has 1.02. Most of Latin America is also above 1. All of Latin America is above 1. The US is above 1. And while it doesn't look like a lot, 4%. We're talking about 4% of 3 billion. So that's a fair number of extra women we're talking about. The world has many more women than men overall, but the one place where that's not true is in this belt which goes from basically North Africa to Korea. That's that one belt in the world pretty much all the way. You can draw a belt starting somewhere in Morocco and keep going east about at that latitude, and that belt, and then go a bit north into China, and you'll find that that's where there are about 4% or less women than men. So less, and that's, I think that the numbers, these numbers are sort of, I think actually, I'll show you, these numbers are not necessarily the worst numbers you're going to see. So I'll show you some more striking numbers in a minute. But I mean, just the fact that there's 6% less women than men is striking, given that that's not the biological, that doesn't look like the biological model. And the way, so Amartya Sen, who's a Nobel Prize winner at Harvard, did this calculation, basically very simple calculation. He said, look, Sub-Saharan Africa is the poorest part of the world. So if there is some, maybe institutional reason why women die. So there might be reasons why women die which have to do with poverty. What's an example of a reason which would hurt women more than men? Reason why poverty would hurt women more than men?
Like during childbirth.
Childbirth. The obvious one is childbirth. Yeah.
And then, compounding upon that, if women in poor situations have less access to contraception, they're going to have more children, which increases the likelihood that there'll be complications.
So everything to do with childbirth is a reason why you might think that in poor countries, women will have a disadvantage. Now you take that disadvantage, you do see evidence of the disadvantage. Sub-Saharan Africa has less women than Europe. So you do see an example of that disadvantage. It's about 2 percentage points or 3 percentage points less women than Europe. But that's, if you think of Sub-Saharan Africa as the part of the world which is the highest maternal mortality rates. It's the part of the world which has the highest fertility rates. Both to your point and your point, it has the, if you take the part of the world where women are most likely to die in childbirth and the place where women have most children, both of those are highest in sub-Saharan Africa. So you could think of this as being a reasonable approximation of the worst case scenario. So take the worst case scenario and then go to China. So that's the exercise. Let's take the worst case scenario, now go to China and ask if we applied the sub-Saharan African ratio to the Chinese population, how many more women would it have had? And the answer is they would have had 44 million more women. So 44 million more women are missing. And that then, you keep doing that, and same order of magnitude in India, and then smaller countries, so smaller numbers, but it all adds up to about 100 million. So you get about 100 million missing women in the world by doing this simple exercise. And that's sort of prima facie evidence. As we'll see, you have to think harder about exactly what this evidence means, but it's prima facie evidence of something very bizarre happening. I mean, you know, whether this is exactly, we'll see what's going on here, but there's something very troubling about this fact, because it seems like somehow populations are managing to get rid of women, quote unquote losing women, through mechanisms which are not the normal biological mechanisms. So that's the missing women. Yeah.
So these 44 million women in China, are they like missing in like rural China, or is it just like all around China?
I'll show you in a minute. I'll show you all kinds of facts about China, in fact. So before I come to that, there's just some questions you might, hypotheses you might have. One is like development the answer? Maybe it's just that, you know, people are somehow there's some reason why just being underdeveloped for reasons we don't understand translates into less women. Maybe we have a theory that maybe it's the case that people are more traditional, something. Now, what makes this fact much more worrying is that development is not making this fact go away. That's sort of a, at least within modern history. We don't know what happened 100 years ago, but right now development is not making this fact go away. If you look at the sex ratio in India, it's not changing. It's in fact pretty much steady. I'll show you numbers in a bit. If you look at the sex ratio in China, it's falling. It's less and less women every year in China. And if you look at the richest parts of China versus the poorest part, to your question, you see a negative correlation. The richest parts of China are the ones which have the least women. Yeah.
Do you know anything about missing men? Like maybe there's some component where there's just a general neglect for children in some parts of the world, and the children in total are missing, not just the girls?
Perfectly. It's a good question. I mean, I think that's what people do when they say the infant mortality rate is too high or something. And I think that that's also a concern. It's not that there aren't other concerns because of this. That's sort of what a lot of people who say that, you know, you shouldn't just look at GDP to measure welfare, emphasize infant mortality rates. Infant mortality rates is exactly the question you're asking, kind of missing boys and girls. And you do see that number is very high in sub-Saharan Africa. Sub-Saharan Africa has the highest infant mortality rate in the world by far. China has now infant mortality rates which are approaching that in the US. So it's not, so infant mortality rates by itself is not by now it's not a huge problem in China. China is down to the range where, you know, it's very, very close to the US. I think it has infant mortality rates of like 25 out of 1,000 live births. US has 18 or 14 or something. It's really in the range where Sub-Saharan Africa, Sierra Leone has 140. So if you just take so if you want to see where infant mortality is a problem, that's not where missing women is a problem. These are different problems. It's not to say you are not right. That's another problem, but it's a different one. So this is sort of just to show you that fact. If you look at which are the countries which have, this is the trend so what I showed you so far was the levels. How many women per men? This is in 2005. What's happened? What's the future? Future is much more scary than the present. The present is what? 100 so if you like 100 there was like 95 girls per 100 boys, so that's about 105 boys per 100 girls, right? That's the current. The future, look at that number for Eastern Asia. That number is 120 boys for 100 girls. So that's like, it's a completely different order of magnitude, right? It's like, think of the future. These are the kids who are being born under 5. So at some point, if this is what stays steady, we're going to see numbers like more like 120 than 105. Right now, there are about 105 boys to 100 girls in China, and that number is going to go up to closer to 120 if as this cohort ages. So that's just backing up the first claim I made, which is it's not getting better. If you look at the number for India, it's 108. 108 is bigger than the current ratio of men to women in India. So current ratio is about 106, and that's 108. So all of these countries which are getting richer, their ratio is getting worse. Do you see what this is? How this is different from the one I showed you before? This is the ratio among under 5s. So these are the future of that population, whereas I showed you the present of the population. Future is worse, not better. I mean, Korea has the same kind of numbers which are worse. Interestingly, Afghanistan and Nepal, which are relatively poor countries, which are not getting rich very fast, actually you don't see much of a change. They're about where they were. So their ratio is about, in the under 5 is about what they are in the adult population. So that suggests that they're not getting worse. It's the rich countries that are getting richer are getting worse. Yeah.
But wouldn't you expect this number to be higher than the overall population because women are more likely to live longer
right.
and like more resilient?
That's absolutely true. So 120 won't go to 120. 120 is going to go to 115. That's about the difference. So 120 is going to go to 115 or 14, but 114 is a lot better than worse than 106. So this number is just, all the trends are bad. That's sort of just to understand, this is a big problem, and it's not one that's getting solved on its own, as far as I can tell. So here's another way to look at it. So this is India and China. Give yourself a few minutes to look at this. So the darkest areas are the worst areas. Does anybody know which are the richer areas of China?
The black areas.
Yeah, it's pretty much exactly the same. I think Shanghai is that gray area right there, which is actually doing surprisingly well. But the rest of China, which is the really poor areas of China, are those very light areas in the east, in the west. That's the Gobi Desert, the Taklamakan Desert, the Xinjiang, all the areas where, with large Muslim populations are in the east. These are the poorest parts of China, and they are the ones which are doing by far the best. The areas that are doing really badly are the most prosperous. The dark areas in the southeast are that's like Guangdong and Guangzhou and all these really like fast-growing, wealthy provinces of China. That's the southeast. So that's a map that suggests again. Yeah.
So I'm not really sure exactly how abortion would play a role in that, but the fact that there is control in the number of kids that couples can have. People might be deciding on purpose to have boys because they want boys for whatever reason. And maybe the people who can make those decisions are people who tend to have more money because, to have abortion is expensive. So
I think that has a lot to do with it. We'll come back to that. But you're totally right that a lot of this, I think, has something to do with people's active choices of sudden. We'll come back to that in a little bit. But this pattern is, you think of as China gets even richer, if this is the trend, then it's a worrying trend, let's say. Now look at India. Again, do you know what those relatively pale areas are? So there's South India, which is relatively prosperous and well educated, and East India, which is the poorest and the most backward part of India. So if you as you go west and north, you're going to some of the richest parts of it. Richest state in India, large state in India, is Maharashtra, which is the kind of the striped state. Let's see. On the west coast, the first state that's not, if you go from the south on the west coast, the first striped one, that's Maharashtra. That's the richest. But the second richest large state is Punjab. And Punjab is that piece of black that's right in the north. So that's literally the second richest and till recently the richest state in India is that area in black. So again, same pattern. Rich states have worse outcomes, not better outcomes. There's no evidence of a positive correlation between income and the gender ratio.
Is Punjab the only state in India that has a different religion than the rest of the others? Or would that be a reason? Maybe.
So Punjab has, but that's actually what that is there's really two states there. There's Punjab and Haryana. They used to be both a part of Punjab. Now they've been split into two states for some years. One of those states is Sikh majority. Sikh is a particular other religion. The other is Hindu majority. There's no difference. Actually, Haryana is slightly worse than Punjab. Delhi city is one of the worst places actually in India. So and that's one of the absolutely richest places. So basically no evidence of a positive correlation between income and the gender ratio. Gender ratio, if anything, gets worse as you get richer for reasons that may very well be close to what you're suggesting. But it's clear that you get this rather dismal pattern. Here's something else, another fact about sort of China, and it's sort of a very long-term view of China. So if you look at this starts in 1920, and you can see that basically from the 1920s, the excess sex ratio, which is in the 5-year birth cohort. So people who are born in that year what's the fraction of boys versus girls. So it used to be about 7% more boys than girls. Then it went up to about 16% during the years when there was a lot of political instability. So if you take of those years, the Japanese invasion, before that and after that, in a sense, China is in civil war. There's a big, what are called the warlords are fighting each other through China. So during wars, you see this ratio going way up. Then it comes down, 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 till about 1976 or something. Now, right around 1976, something else happens. China institutes what's called the one-child policy. The one-child policy is one where, at least in the richer areas, where is the only place it was enforced, families were allowed to have only one child at most. Then that policy gets implemented in the mid-70s, and you see what happens since. What's striking is that it doesn't just go up and stay up. It keeps going up. So there's something else going on top of the fact that the one-child policy gets instituted. In fact, over time, the one-child policy has been relaxed. Families which have had, and this reflects some of the tastes of the population clearly, families which had one daughter were, in some areas, were allowed to have a son or have a second child more recently. So there is some attempt to relax the policy in exactly the direction that suggests that there is a preference for boys, but with all that, the trend has been up. Yeah.
You know what time those policies were implemented, the relaxation?
So the relaxation, actually, a bunch of the relaxations happen. You see that flattening in about 1982. That's the first relaxation. So you do see a flattening, but the trend is bad. Yeah.
Even if it's being relaxed, just being relaxed, if the first kid that you have is a girl, right? And then in that case, you might then try to have the boy. But then if you have the boy right away, then maybe you just stop having kids. So the ratio is still,
actually, let's take that. So could this be generated by a stopping rule? This is so imagine that families have a stopping rule which says we will stop when we have the first boy. Okay, this is their stopping rule. This is a plausible stopping rule. My mother has 3 brothers. It's 1 brother and 3 sisters. The brother is the youngest. So that's not an implausible stopping rule. My mother's only brother has 3 daughters and 1 son. The son is the youngest. So it's not an implausible stopping rule. However, imagine we had this stopping rule. But in any birth, the probability of boy and girl were equal. What would be the population sex ratio?
Still the same.
More boys, right? No, you'd have more women.
No, it's half.
Which ones?
Half both.
If you keep having children when you have women, then and you stop as soon as you have 1 boy, you'd have more women, or you'd expect to have more women.
No, because like the possibilities.
I think that's where you stop immediately. You stop immediately if you have 1 son. Statistically, it seems like 50-50 for all boys. There might be like families where there are more girls. That's kind of a little bit to make it more 50-50. But like there will be more. Most families will stop like one.
So you think there will be more boys or more girls?
I mean, I think it pretty much evens out.
I think there'll be more boys because if you have a boy, you just stop, so then that family just has a boy. And if you have a girl, and then you try again, then if you have a boy, then right now you have 1 family with 1 boy, and another family with a girl and a boy. But there's still more boys than girls.
Yeah.
So like whenever you get the boy, you stop. So
You would come back to that?
Yeah, I mean, so it's like if you just do like an expected value, so like you get like half the cases you'll have 1 boy,
Yeah.
quarter of the cases you have a girl and a boy, and 1/8 of the cases you have a girl.
You're exactly right. The answer is it doesn't change anything, and it's very simple to see. The reason why it doesn't change anything is very simple, which is that every birth has a 50% chance of having a boy. So just take the number of births, forget about families. There's a certain number of births, let's say 50 million births. 25 million of those births will be boys and 25 million of those births will be girls. Doesn't matter which family it happens. Every birth is a separate independent event and has 50% chance of being a boy. So paradoxical as it sounds, stopping rules don't change the sex ratio. They change the distribution. Now here's what might be going on, which is more complicated. Yeah?
But again, the relaxation is not that like it's completely relaxed so that you're gonna have it. So that would be true if you can have as many kids as possible, but like doesn't it make a difference though if you have to stop?
As long as you don't determine the sex of the child directly, it doesn't matter. You're going to every birth is an independent event with a 50% chance of being a boy. So take the number of births, multiply by 50%, you're going to get a number of. So it makes no difference. Now, let's think of one more step in that argument. Which families would a lot of girls grow up in? How many children would they have more children or less children? Would girls grow up on average in a family with more children or less children? More children. So if you think that families that have more children have less resources, then if you have a stopping rule, then girls would be growing up in families with more children and therefore less resources. And therefore, girls will be, a stopping rule can have an effect on child outcomes because it leads to girls being all living in large families and boys all living in small families. So boys get all the attention, the parental resources. Girls, there's 7 girls and 1 boy in the girl families, and therefore the girls end up with getting less resources. So that's one possible reason why you might get this outcome, is that it has something to do with the stopping rule, but not directly. It has to do with the stopping rule then generates an allocation of girls across families. Yeah.
So that's also true. If you think about even with the relaxation, imagine a family in a rich area where everything is more expensive. Let's say even if it was a little bit more relaxed, they still limit themselves to say, okay, we're gonna have a maximum of 2 kids. So let's say, maybe the first kid that they have is a girl, but then they say, the probability of having a girl for the next one, maybe it's not really 50% because they say, well, unless we're only going to have this kid if it is a boy.
Yeah, so what you're saying is completely right, that the only way you get away from 50-50 is by deliberately, or at least doing something to the girl that makes her not live. That's the only way you get there. If the girls who are born live, then you can't get away from this. It doesn't matter what your stopping rule is. Even if the government makes complicated policies, the policies don't change that. Every birth is either a boy or a girl. Okay. So here's the last fact I wanted you to see, which is that if you look at the sex ratios in India, they're getting worse. They got worse for a while. Now they've stabilized at a low number. So in 1900, there were 972 girls for boys, men for women, women for men. Now there's 933. So that's just the trend is, in India you don't see a trend after 1971 or 1981, but the trend, historical trend is very negative. So that brings us to the sort of the question, before we get to policy, in a sense, we need to know what's going on. What's going on? There are 2 possible answers. One is kind of tradition, and the other is economics. So one is people are actually, there's a set of traditions which make bad things happen, but people are not willing them to happen. And the other is that people are actually making choices to make these things happen. So when the So what we're going to spend some time doing is trying to distinguish between these two views. Is it tradition? Is it economics? So you could imagine just traditionally, there's some theory which says that girls need less food. That's false, but you believe it, and you don't actually actively do anything to make them die. You just believe, you have wrong beliefs. You think girls need less food because adult women are smaller than adult men, and so you feed your girls less. This is not an attempt to kill them, it's just a tradition, but then that could feed back and have a consequence, right? You could, so problem is, how do you test this? Yeah.
If you actually look at like fertility rates, so if the, I don't know, like if the number of people that are born, it's actually about 50-50, but then the number, like within 5 years, you see a clear difference, so maybe something like that's happening. But even if in terms of birth rate, if there's a difference, then something else.
So part of it is, one answer to this question is, if these guys are not getting born, then obviously something else is going on. Now, mostly till about 5 years ago, or not 15 years ago, you don't see a big trend in birth rates. The trend, now you actually see a trend in birth rates as well. Reported births are getting, there are more and more reported boys relative to girls. But about 15 years ago, you don't see that. What you did see was more different mortality rates for boys and girls. So imagine that you wanted to test this view. Well, the problem is, how do you test it? You don't actually observe who eats what in a family. So it's hard to imagine you going and figuring out, oh, they're not feeding their daughter, they're feeding their son. I mean, that's just too difficult to do, because everybody eats out of the same cooked food, and so it's going to be very hard to find. So somebody had a very good idea of how to do it, which is to look at specialized adult goods like cigarettes. Your daughter, a 5-year-old daughter, doesn't smoke a cigarette, nor does your 5-year-old son. So when a son is born, if there's an effect on how much smoking you do, it has nothing to do with the children, children smoking. So children are not going to be a direct source of demand. So then you can, why is that good? Because then you can look at what happens to smoking when the family gets a boy or a girl. And which one if girls are fed less, what would you expect?
Well, because those smoke more cigarettes, because they have a larger share of their budget to spend on cigarettes, because they'll get less to the growth.
Right, or smoking goes down by less. So the basic observation you should see is, when a child is born, adult income goes down, right? Because adults have less money to spend on themselves, because they will feed the child. But if they feed the boy less than the girl less than the boy, then you'd see that they will, when a boy is born, they're going to really cut back on cigarettes. But when a girl is born, they'll cut back less, because they're feeding the girl less. So we have pretty precise measurement of demand for adult goods. So we can use that. We don't know who smokes, but we know that the kids are not doing the smoking. So therefore, we can, by observing what happens to a family when the child is born, we can back out whether or not there is a difference in the way you feed boys or girls. Is that clear? Why that's better than trying to measure? It's very hard to measure who eats what, but clearly the kids don't eat, they don't drink, don't smoke cigarettes, and they don't drink alcohol. So if we looked at alcohol and cigarettes and a few other things that are essentially adult goods, we should be able to back out what's happening when the child is born. Okay? Is that clear what the So somebody did that. I'll show you the data for India. So take beverages. Beverages doesn't include milk. So it's soda and tea and all those things. And this is just basically, this table is horrible, but this paper was published in an obscure journal many years ago, and the only way I could do is this is just a scan of that. There's nothing else I could find. There's no electronic version, etc. So, but it's what you're looking for is the effect of a boy versus a girl. So males, number of males between 0 and 4 versus number of females between 0 and 4, and the effect of that on the consumption of beverages. The answer is it has no effect. That what's in the bracket is the t statistic. The t statistic is 0. But if anything, yeah, I mean, there's just both the numbers are 0, and that's basically what you find. You find no effect of yeah. You see what you'd expect, which is that, for example, when a child is born, you're just poorer. So you buy less rice, less wheat, but there's no difference between girls and boys. Boys and girls have the same effect, if anything, on both. So you just find there's no evidence that, basically there's no evidence that when a child is born, boy child is born, families cut back more than when a girl child is born. I mean, there's just, we don't find any evidence, and this has been looked in many countries. So another tradition story is the following. Imagine that tradition is, when the child gets sick, do I take it to the hospital? And with a boy, the tradition is I always take it to the hospital. With a girl, I just let her, give us some water and, generally, make, sing songs to her, but I don't take her to the hospital, something like that, Do we see any evidence of this? So this is hard to study because, we don't actually observe that many episodes of life-threatening diseases. But there's a nice fact that Eliana Rose identified, which is the following. She looked at areas, so over time, different parts of India have droughts at different points of time. So some areas have droughts in 2006, some have droughts in 2004, some have droughts in 1996. So a drought is a time of economic stress. So drought is when, what's a drought? Why is it economic stress?
Low rainfall leads to low crop yield.
Yeah, it's basically you can't grow anything, it's too dry. So, so when the rains fail, crops fail, families have no money. Well, how are they dealing with this particular emergency? And there she finds some evidence that relative to non-drought years, in drought years, girls die more. So that suggests that emergencies might be a part of the story, that in emergencies, girls are not treated as well. So I given one example, which is not taking her to the hospital. The other one might be, when I don't have money, I don't buy food for her. So some tradition of that kind might explain it. Problem is that droughts are not frequent enough. And if you remember the trends are all bad, right? They're all getting worse. India and China are getting richer. The dependence on agriculture and general, these kinds of extreme events is just going down. People are just, droughts don't matter as much as in India now. Than when 20, 30 years ago, agriculture was 50% of GDP. Now it's 25% of GDP. So basically, droughts matter less to people. And since droughts matter less to people, you would imagine the trend being favorable rather than against. Think of China. Most people are now in industry. they're also richer, and as you get richer, you would imagine that emergencies are less serious because you always have some money. You're no longer at the margin of starvation. So problem with this story is that it's just inconsistent with the fact that things are getting worse over time. You would think that under this story things would be getting better because it's an emergency story, and as countries get richer and less exposed to risk, you would see less and less of this rather than more and more of this. So that's why this can't be the whole explanation. It could be a piece of it. So going back to our distinction between the kind of the tradition-based stories and the more economic stories, here's an economic fact which is striking. So if you like this, so in other words, what I mean by an economic story is that tradition-based stories say that there's some rule people use, fixed rule, which they have not decided on this rule, they're just given to them, and that rule somehow under some circumstances has bad outcomes for girls. So when the girl is sick, you don't take her to the hospital. That's a rule. This is something we are now asking a question: when the economic incentives to treat girls better changes, do you treat them better? That suggests that you don't have a fixed rule. You're actually behaving in a kind of rational way, quote unquote rational way. You're actually planning to have bad things happen to girls. So do you see what the distinction is between tradition-based stories and economic stories? Economic stories are ones which essentially say that we are making active choices which have consequences for girls, rather than this is a rule we use and sometimes bad things happen because we use a particular rule. Here's a nice example. So in China, after 1979, agriculture is liberalized, meaning people are allowed to keep the money from growing their crops. This is the start of China's economic miracle. It's called the family responsibility system, and it's sort of when everything in China starts. Tea is one crop where women have a comparative advantage, and even absolute advantage, because tea is something that has to be picked very patiently. Small leaf, the most valuable leaves in tea are the smallest ones. So you have to pick the small leaves. You have to pick them without bruising them. If the leaf is bruised, the price goes down. So the best leaf teas, like Chinese teas, sell for $600 a kilogram. So something of the order of magnitude of it's pretty expensive. So if you actually have the best teas and you bruise a leaf, that costs money. So you better have somebody who picks with very delicate fingers. Turns out, at least whether it's true or not, I don't know, but it's believed in China that women are better for picking expensive tea leaves. Okay, maybe they are. Maybe this is a story that men made up to make them do it. But whatever the explanation, this is the belief. So given that belief, what matters is what people believe here, right? Because you would imagine that another crop, which is the opposite, is fruits. Fruits need somebody to climb a tree and pick them. And again, in China, the belief is that men are better at climbing trees. Maybe again false, but so men are better. So men are better at picking fruits. Women are better at picking tea. That's starting fact. Okay, at least that's what people believe. Let's start from there. Now, suppose parents respond to economic incentives. Then what would you expect happens when the price of tea goes up? What do you think will happen to their daughter? Yeah. They treat their daughter better. They're going to feed her more. They're going to, take her to the hospital more willingly, etc. So you'd expect that. And likewise, when the price of fruits goes up, you'd expect boys to be treated better. Now, in fact, both price of fruit and trees go up, and that's a trend So it's hard to use the trend to study this because everything's going up. Both tea and fruits are going up. So you can't distinguish between these two. But one thing you can do is you can look at areas which are suitable for tea, areas which are suitable for fruits, and areas which are suitable for neither. And now you can say, when tea prices go up, do we see a bigger change in the gender ratio in the tea suitable areas relative to the others? Or you can ask, when the price of fruits go up, do we see a bigger change in the gender ratio in the fruit favored areas than in the areas where neither is favored? So we're always comparing areas where basically wheat or rice grows with tea areas and fruit areas. Is that clear what we're doing? We're asking, when the price of fruits goes up, do we see a different trend in fruit growing areas relative to wheat growing areas? Is it clear why that's a good way to look at this question? What are we worried about? We're worried about if we just said, well, the price of tea is going up, what's happening to girls? Well, the price of tea is going up, but that's going up over time. If the fraction of girls is going down, we'll get a negative association out of that. Because there are two things happening. One is that it's just going down for other reasons. The other is prices of tea is going up for whatever economic reasons. And I'm going to correlate them. I'll find a negative correlation. So that's not what we want to do. We want to look at areas which are suitable for tea. That's where the price of tea should have an effect. It should not have an effect in areas which are not suitable for tea. So we're going to compare the effect of an increase in price of tea in girl suitable areas, in tea suitable areas versus non-tea suitable areas, not compare trends. This is basically what is called doing a difference in difference. I'm going to take high tea periods, high tea price periods, low tea price periods, and compare tea suitable areas and non-tea suitable areas. You look more lost than I would expect. It's a very easy idea. So somebody else want to say back what I'm trying to say? Who's going to volunteer to improve on that exposition? I'm going to cold call if somebody doesn't volunteer. Okay, go ahead.
Basically, you're trying to see that if this does actually have an effect on how parents treat children, you'll see girls treated better in places where tea is like the cash crop or something, and the price increases, versus areas where tea is not the cash crop, but the price increases. There shouldn't be a change in how the girls are treated.
Right. So we're going to compare years when tea prices went up with years when tea prices didn't go up, and compare them in areas where tea is a plausible crop and areas where tea cannot be grown. So the increase in tea prices should have no effect where tea cannot be grown. It have a spurious effect maybe, but no real effect. It should have an effect where tea can be grown. So we're going to compare tea possible areas with other areas when tea prices go up versus when it doesn't. Yeah?
How do you think about it, just like you have your control population where the tea price going up shouldn't have an effect, and then you have your non-control and you just take your data and subtract your control from it to see your actual difference?
That's exactly right. So that's another way to say the same thing. Anybody else want to add anything to that? So let me show you some trends first. So that's the basic fact which we want to. So that's tea prices. Suddenly in 79 you see tea prices just skyrocketing. That's first fact. Tea prices are going up, tea production is going up. Second thing is that if you look at tea versus other crops, tea prices are going up faster than other crops. So other crops are like grain. Grain is going up, but tea is going up faster. Oil is going up, but tea is going up faster. So tea is the crop that's going up fastest among these crops. Look at this one. Here we're comparing fruits with tea, and fruits are going up much faster than fruits with other crops like grain, oil, and cotton. And again, fruits are going up much faster. So basically, what matters is not the absolute price, right? It matters, the relative price matters, because it's what makes you want to do more tea. So tea areas are benefiting relative to those other areas. So here's the basic, so this is a complicated graph. So let's do this slowly, okay? Try to understand what's in this graph. So what's in this graph is areas which grow a lot of tea. This is the effect of, this is the coefficient in a regression of, so this is the effect of having more area devoted to tea in a particular year. So what this is saying is that if before 1979 you see tea prices are low, in those years you see some, if you look at the fraction of males, the fraction of males bounces around, but the effect, the fact that tea is sown has essentially very close to zero effect. After 1979, the fact that tea is sown has a much bigger effect. So this is the effect of how much land you put into tea in a particular year, so year by year. So in that year, what's happening in 1983, how many boys versus girls were born in high tea areas relative to low tea areas. That's always the exercise. So think of one more % of land devoted to tea. What is the effect of that on the fraction of boys born in 1983? That's what that says. So the main point to take away is that you see a big drop after 1979. So tea areas, the fraction of boys born goes down right when you think it should go down, which is when the price starts going up. Okay? So that's what this is saying. Before that, the average is kind of at 0.15. After that, the average is about 0.35 or something. So the fraction of boys goes down after the change. This is what happens in the fruit areas. The opposite, right? After 79, fruit prices go up also a lot, and fruit favors boys. So the fraction of boys goes, the ratio used to be lower, it goes up afterwards. Yeah?
Are these significant results?
Yes. So the average is significantly different. So it's not, you're right, that year by year it is not significant, but that's because it's a small sample of people. But if you take the average of these periods, the averages are significantly different.
I'm just having trouble understanding how, so if women are better at picking tea leaves, I don't know, I mean, the economics make sense, but I can't see families consciously choosing to have more girls for 11 years, like in 12 years they'll be able to.
Well, yes and no. You're right that, but on the other hand, it also sends a signal which reminds them, oh, well, you know, two things. One, you might imagine that the women might be more pro girls, plausibly, no? And if you think that women income share goes up in the family, they have more say. So that's one possible mechanism. The second mechanism is just that, you know, maybe when the income goes up, when girls' incomes go up, they just look at it and say, well, maybe my girl will actually be, you know, after all the women are working these days. Why not have another girl? They'll be fine. They'll find a job as well. I mean, I can't tell what's going on at that level, but it's clear that this result is significant. It's actually substantial. Okay, final set of thoughts. Suppose this goes on. So, no, let me back up. What's going on? How are they losing all these girls? If it's an economic mechanism, we need to, that says that there is incentive to lose the girls. How are they actually doing it? What's going on? Unfortunately, it's all not very nice what's going on. So two things are happening. One is basically the technology for pre-birth detection of gender of the child has improved a lot. If you do amniocentesis, which is an expensive procedure, you can basically very high probability predict the gender of the child. The reason why rich areas are doing the worst is precisely because of that. Rich areas are using this technology to figure out who their, it's an expensive technology, so you have to use it, you spend money to use it. Rich areas, you see in like the richer parts of India, signs up which say, would you rather spend basically $100 now or $10,000 later, which is basically, the idea is that you have to give dowry for your daughter to get her married, and that's your cost, and so you should really get rid of, spend, you know, whatever, $100 now, identify her, and then have a an abortion, rather than spend, as you see these signs up, you know, they're all illegal. Amniocentesis about 8 years ago was made illegal in India. It's still completely prevalent. And people, and since people are willing to try to have many babies, they're even willing to do it by using a much weaker technology, which is sonography. Sonography, which is a technology that is legal, doesn't identify the gender of the child all the time, but about 25% of the time it does. And when it does, then you can immediately abort the child. So they're using technologies to identify. This is why this is happening more in richer areas, because technologies cost money. And the poorest areas are ones where the technology is least used because it's just expensive. So you see basically a very, very clear correlation between where the technology arrives and the fraction of boys being born. So that's one thing that's going on. Second thing that's going on almost surely is a lot of post-birth, I think murder is the only word you could use. I think unfortunately there's a lot of, I think, children being disposed of. There are villages which proudly report, there's a news report I think from like the Chinese news agency which says that we haven't had a boy born in our village for the last 5 years. A girl born in our village in the last 5 years. There was a news report of the village chief proudly announcing that there was no girl born in his village in the last 5 years. So I think there is a lot of just direct, deliberate action going on there. Now, one thing to think about is, there are many things to think about here. How do you stop it? Well, the government has tried. It tried to have technologies. There's a bunch of programs around now. For example, India has a number of states where they have programs which basically promise parents a certain amount of money if your girl graduates from high school. Quite a lot of money. So that's one way to go, is give incentives based on girl survival. Various versions of that program are, but it's not clear how well that works, because in some ways that's still, it's something that's based on 20 years later, and you don't necessarily want think that people are that responsive to it. So that's the other thing you can think about is there any economic force that this sets by itself, it sets on, which will then make kind of re-equilibrium. So one issue that arises is what's happening to the marriage market. So what do you think will happen to the marriage market in China?
Well, if there are fewer
Yeah. So you would see the emergence, dowry should go down and bride price should go up. Now, one reason this hasn't happened already is that men who, at least in, why this hasn't happened already in India especially, is that men tend to marry women who are younger than them. If the population is growing, then and people marry women who are younger than them, then even if there are fewer girls born, the girls are from a different cohort, from a younger cohort. So as the population is growing, so there are more girls around. Right? So that's one problem, that this force might operate, but only if population growth stops. So it's going to operate more in China, where population growth has stopped, than in India, where the population growth is still going on. As long as there's population growth, you're going to see this possibility of just going down in the cohort chain, rather than, so you might imagine that the price of girl would go up, but it won't go up if people marry much younger women. That's one issue. Second issue, so in China you do start, so in China one of the things that people are often puzzled about is what's going on with this savings rate. The savings rate in China is, personal savings rate is historically unprecedented. People save 30% of their incomes. This is as against compared to the US, which used to save 0 till recently, and after the crisis has gone up to 7%. So personal savings rate in China are massive. So one puzzle people have often been thinking about is what's going on with that. There's a very nice paper which does the following. It asks, if I look at areas which have high gender ratios, where women are really scarce, are people saving more in those areas? Why would they save more? Why would you save more if you're a parent of a boy? So in particular, they ask, if you're a parent of a boy, in China it's easy because people have one child, so you have either a parent of a boy or a parent of a girl. If you're a parent of a boy in an area where the gender ratio is particularly bad, so very few girls, it turns out you save more. Why would that be the case?
Well, if you were
The price of a bride.
Yeah, you have to buy your son a bride. So people are saving more. So basically they suggest that people are now beginning to save more in order to buy their child a bride. And the way you buy it is you don't go and buy her in the market. But basically women have become very picky about not marrying into families which can't afford to give their son a separate apartment to move into when they get married. China has very poor mortgage markets, so you can't really take out a mortgage to buy a house. So what you basically, the only way you buy a house is you borrow from your parents, or your parents give you a gift. So parents now, it's become a status issue for parents to marry their sons. And the way you marry your son is by buying him an apartment when he gets married. So if you don't have enough wealth, you can't buy an apartment, and then your son can't get married. So this seems to be sort of one of the factors that might actually re-equilibrate China, because it seems like one thing that's going on in China right now is this massive increase in savings. And I'm sure that this is not problem with this massive increase in savings is it's a zero-sum game, right? There are only so many girls. So the fact that I'm saving a lot for my son just means my son can have a bride, but not anybody else. It's not that the number of women go up because I save. So this is not really solving the problem. It's squeezing parents, because parents now have to. So if I'm going to save $1 more in order to buy my son a house so he can get married, then somebody else is going to want to do the same thing. He's going to try to save even more than me and buy a house for his son. So that competition is a very kind of a negative competition. Everybody's getting hurt by that competition. So that should make parents really rethink this strategy. So, I mean, that's the one sign of hope I see is this one, which is that the market forces seem to be kind of operating to make this problem better. That's true in China, much less true in India, because India's still population is growing, so there's still this margin of adjustment. Okay, so questions, comments? Otherwise I'll stop. Yeah.
But in China, wouldn't you see that sort of now an increase in growth again because parents see that they don't have to save money to have a
Yeah, so you might see that. We aren't seeing it yet, but maybe once it gets clear that your daughter gets to live in a wonderful apartment, etc., and having a son is a huge pain because you have to now find ways to pay for his apartment, you might start preferring daughters. So maybe we'll see that. Okay, well, thank you.